So right off the bat, the first thing I tell everybody, and it's a little tough now because this changed what it was from a few years ago. It's that you sort of have to be careful when you order because you can't really change anything later. I guess technically maybe you can, but it's a very involved process. That's not super easy. So just let's assume really you cannot change anything. Everything is now soldered to the board, especially now that Apple is doing their own silicon. It's great. It's very efficient. It's powerful, but that also means more things are sort of unified and you really can't change things later. So what you order now is basically exactly what you're going to have a year from now, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So you sort of have to have a little bit of foresight and some forethought into what is it? Forethought a word? You got to think ahead into what you are going to use down the road. And this is tough these days because that wasn't always the case. You used to be able to go in later and you could upgrade the RAM. Some people were taking out the hard drives and putting in SSDs. Thankfully, you don't have to do that. But really, you can't change anything now. The memory is soldered. The video memory is now sort of part of the CPU. The SSD can't be changed. So all that to say, you want to look at each individual part very carefully because you cannot change it. So think about what you're going to be doing today, but also what you might be doing 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now. That's what makes it a little bit tricky. And that's what I was thinking too is, okay, right now I want to use this MacBook Air really just for scripting, web browsing, maybe some Photoshop, maybe some like light Final Cut Pro use. The base model should be good with that. But what if I want to maybe, go a little bit more advanced later on? Maybe I want to add a couple of plugins on Final Cut Pro. Do I need more RAM? Do I need more SSD space? That's where it sort of starts to get complicated. So do your best to make your best educated guess on sort of your workflow, and then you can sort of build out appropriately from there. But right off the bat, just know that you're sort of marrying the configuration that you get, because once you choose what you choose, there is no going back. What about you, Matt? What's your first tip?
No. Well, I completely agree. And I guess, that's what, once you decide what computer you want, maybe that's the most important thing. But I think equally as important is deciding which is the best actual computer for you. Because, we've talked about this before, but, we use the MacBook Pros, the 14-inch MacBook Pros with M1 Max inside because our job, I wouldn't say requires it, but it definitely can benefit from that processor. So it's worth the extra money for us. But you got to be honest with yourself that maybe you don't need that. And yes, the MacBook Pro is cool, it's shiny, it's new, but maybe the MacBook Air is the way to go. I mean, I don't know who this would be for, but maybe even the 13-inch MacBook Pro is the way to go. You just have to figure out what the right computer is, and then I agree. Once you figure that out, then really nail down what that processor, RAM, all that thing, what that is, because you can't really change that later on. And I would also say to err on the side of more is better. So if you can afford more, pay for more, just to be safe. You never know. At the very least, it's going to be worth more when you go to sell it to upgrade later on.
Right. That always in the EV world. They always say you want to buy the biggest battery you can afford, get the most range. Sort of the same thing here. Buy the best processor you can afford, so you sort of have room to grow. With these Apple chips, the base model is still really good, but you can grow in and certainly utilize that stuff more down the road with certain apps. And I guess to your point, first things first. Before we even go into computer, let's decide the processor we need, because that's sort of, through process of elimination, going to decide sort of for us what Mac we can get. So Matt, what are the current M processors we can get right now?
Oh, so we've got quickly evolving. We got the M2 chip, which is in the MacBook Air that we were just talking about, and the MacBook Pro 13-inch, which came out a few weeks ago, which honestly, let's not even talk about it. We've been racking our brains figuring out who this computer is for, and we really can't figure it out. So I would say don't even buy it unless for some strange reason you know that it's for you. But in general, I would say just forget that computer. So that's the M2 computers that we have, which are the latest up-to-date ones. We then have all the M1 computers that have ever been announced. Those are still out. So from the M1, the regular M1, we have the 13-inch MacBook Air and the 13-inch. Well, no, they discontinued the MacBook Pro, the 13-inch.
Right, they have.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's the only one they don't sell still. So we have the original M1 MacBook Air, which is at that $999 price point. So that is the cheapest Mac that you can get, or MacBook. There is the MacBook Air, or sorry, the Mac Mini. We have the Mac. Speaking of Mac Mini, we have the Mac Mini, which has the M1 chip inside, and then we have the iMac. So if you want a desktop, that has the M1 chip inside. the 24-inch iMac. And then we get to the more expensive Pro level computers, which is the 14-inch MacBook Pro and the 16-inch MacBook Pro, both with the M1 Pro or M1 Max options. And finally, we have the Mac Studio, which has the M1 Pro, or no, M1 Max or M1 Ultra chips inside. So many M1s, so many M2s, Ultra, Max, all kinds of names. But that's kind of the M1 lineup right now. And I would honestly say any of the computers, aside from, even if, actually, honestly, even the 13-inch MacBook Pro, if you decided to buy it for whatever reason, it's still going to be a great computer. The only reason not to get the 13-inch MacBook Pro is simply because of the price, but the actual computer should be great. But so any of them, depending on what you're looking for, I mean, they're going to be awesome. Hey, you made it to the end of this Apple Circle podcast clip, but there is a full episode. So if you want to listen to that, click the video over here. You can watch the entire thing. Or if you're someone who just wants to listen in your headphones, we have the audio version. Of course, links for that where you can subscribe and listen in your favorite audio podcast player is down below. And last but not least, the Apple Circle channel, where we have many videos covering everything Apple, is also linked down below. So be sure to check that out and get subscribed.